Digital Pedagogy Lab. We're focusing today on the critical instructional design, the double Amy edition. Welcome. Can we have a site there introduce themselves?
I'm Amy Collier. I work at Middlebury.
I'm Amy Slay. I also work at Middlebury on our Monterey campus.
I'm Trisha Matthews, and I teach at Montclair State University.
Excellent. Welcome. I couldn't hear who's in the back. You need to move a little closer to the microphone.
I'm Sonia Burrows, and I work at Middlebury.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Terry's roboting a bit, but we'll see how we go here. Go ahead, Terry.
And we only have until 1:10. That's true?
Yeah, we got about 20 minutes.
We introduce the off-site folks after the on-site go and just have our chat.
Right. We did our informal introductions before we went live. So why don't you let us know what's going on site, because that's what everyone that's off-site wants to know.
Well, it's almost over here. It's day 4, which is pretty amazing that we've all survived this long. It's incredibly intense and a wide range of conversations. In the critical instructional design track, we've been doing a lot of different things around what critical instructional design looks like, how to talk about implicit and explicit values of your design, and how to kind of break down some of the assumptions you take into even the fact that there is a design process, troubling that a little bit. Yesterday we had a visitor, Ashley Wade, who's one of the fellows here, come speak about decolonizing rigor in assessment through government assessment. And then today we're talking about how to take all of this back to the institutional context, because that's what's going to happen next, right? That people are going to have to bring these ideas back to their institution, and that's hard to do. And so I actually would love to hear from folks who are in other tracks also about that particular piece of it, but also anything else.
Excellent. So let's hear about the other tracks.
So I'm a fellow at the Institute, and I signed up for the domain of one's own. So we've been thinking in part about the theoretical and ethical implications of having students share work in such a public space, and also doing hands-on practical work with different tools for capturing information and how we show information, how we showcase it. I'm very excited about a new toy that lets you do 3D timelines. I'm not particularly tech savvy, but I'm really loving it. It's cool to build. I'm going to work on it with my students. Today we were thinking particularly about assessment, and again, not taking it as neutral, and so it wasn't simply a conversation about how do they work, but really what we are doing when we grade students, and what we're doing when we assess their work, and how we can challenge that while still being really clear that people grade and people get grades, and there's only so much dismantling we can do about that. Yeah.
And Amy, you want to jump? Sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm in the intro track, the critical digital pedagogy. We also talked about assessment today, which very much covers the concept of how to bring this back to your home institution, because we ended up
a little bit closer to the mic will help too, please. Sorry. Or we won't hear you. We want to hear you.
We also ended up speaking about assessment as we went today, and just wanted to underscore the difficulty of bringing back to our home institutions some of the ideas that we ended up coming away with today, specifically that assessment doesn't work the way that we do it, because it often at institutions is required to assign a grade where what we really want to do is have the students drive the learning, students drive the assessment, and work more on that. And so the challenge will be in trying to make that value fit within the requirement to assess.
Maybe I can just quickly add that in our track, particularly today, we've been talking about how to have those conversations about more critical approaches and sort of questioning things that are often treated as uncontested in non-threatening ways and in ways that are accessible to people who are not thinking that way. So we had a really great conversation this morning about partnerships and what partnerships we can designers and faculty and administrators, and like you can know that I know it.
Wonderful.
I would be curious to hear from the folks in the Google Hangout about things at your institution. How do you have these conversations at your institution? How do you kind of trouble the waters around assessment, or have these kinds of conversations where things are questioned that are often not questioned? How do you do that? How do you do that at your institutions?
I think Samantha was about to jump in there. You're
Actually,
muted though.
I had a question for them, not so much an answer for me. So my question, I heard I think it was Sonia talking about getting students involved in the assessment process and ways of involving students and in assessment. It sounds like maybe from a generation standpoint. Did you guys come up with any good ideas, or is there anything that you can share from your time there?
That's such a tough question.
Come closer.
I mean, sorry. We didn't come up with solutions as much as just continue to discuss it. And I think that, can you hear me?
Yes, it's perfect. Okay. I would bother you if I couldn't.
Okay. So I don't really have an answer as to what the solution is, because we could talk about that for months probably. But we did just continue to discuss ways that we can make students more involved in the assessment process, and have self-assessment and peer review and peer assessment be more a part of what we do as far as outcomes and students.
One thing we talked about in the domain of one's own is a model, and it's hard to know how this would translate, where every assignment isn't an assignment region A or B or 89 or 94, but there are different ways to think about what we're assessing so that we could single the students. But sometimes the most important thing is that you do it, and is that it's submitted, and that we ask students for reflection about their work and their process all along the way. And so that can be as far as the kind of contract process that I'm going to try to get, or the idea that at different points in the semester, the student starts thinking about what they're doing and how they're doing that work. So it's not just a grade at the end that they compile scores and better grades.
Yesterday we talked a lot about this piece too, and yes, involving students in the conversation at the level of a rubric creation. So how do students help build the rubric for an assignment? Those kinds of things came up. There were a lot of ideas around giving students options so that the requirement for their grade wasn't hinged upon one particular kind of evidence, so that you could have lots of creativity. Students could bring their own personal take on things. One of our colleagues in the track, Joe, shared that at his institution, they use a framework, Woven, where students can do written, oral, verbal, electronic, and narrative, nonverbal as like the kinds of evidence they can bring to an assignment, or that you need to have the opportunity for students to give all those kinds of evidence as part of the course. And I thought that was a pretty interesting idea, and it generated a lot of conversation in the group about different ways that might play out in different kinds of course contexts.
Interesting. Tanya's back. Did you have something to add as well, Tanya? Or are you there? She looks almost frozen though.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It helps if I turn the microphone on. Yeah, no, I think what you guys are talking about is really interesting. And even at that level, watching how tightly my classmates, I guess, colleagues, are tied to the rubric. And I kind of said, you know what, I'm going to ignore the rubric. I'm just going to, and you know, one of the
we keep dropping off.
Make sure that you've filled in the blanks. Could you hear me?
You dropped out for a second for me, at least.
Anyway, that's
ignore the rubric.
Oh, yeah, just the idea that if you use the rubric at the end instead of the beginning of an assignment, so take the risks, you know, read what you think and do what you think the assignment wants or needs, and then at the end just, you know, use the rubric to fill in the blanks. I think, at least for me, is a good suggestion moving forward.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I had a discussion this week with my students about rubrics and how they really like them because it guides them in what they're supposed to do, but then it just puts so many limits on top of them, and let them know that that's the point. So we had that discussion. We just had first week classes here, so I've been going through all this with my students, and I like the discussion as well of we're forced into this system that we have to report a grade, and I have to report a grade between 1 and 100, but I don't want to. I want to abolish grading, but and so I have a choice of either, oh well, we'll just hide it in between us in the class, but then for the purposes of the administration, we're going to report the grade, or should we take more responsibility on ourselves as educators, and importantly, educators that we have a voice where some don't, to push back on the system. So I think there's a lot of that tension for perhaps some of you there.
I think the tension that I feel around rubrics is that students have been trained in a certain system. They've been trained to go to the assignment and look for key words and look for key things, and that is the box that they're producing their results in. So when you say to them, and I teach writing, so writing and literature, so it's very frustrating sometimes, because when you say to them, okay, we're going to generate a rubric, they go back to all the old rubrics that they've seen. Or if we try to talk about what good writing looks like, they're looking for the right answer all the time, and they feel very uncomfortable when they don't have the right answer. And this, I teach freshman comp at a community college, so often they're not necessarily students who they've hadn't had a lot of freedom, and I think that they are learning how to be students still, learning how to expand beyond the system and to learn for themselves, as opposed to because they've been told to. So I think there's constantly this tension back and forth between, we can support the students by telling them what we're looking for and the clear expectations, and they learn something from those conversations if you explicate the conversations. And if you take away some of those supports, you can make it so uncomfortable that they don't feel like they're learning, they don't feel like they can learn. And so how do you make the balance between, the question for me is always, how do you find the balance between the discomfort that true learning actually engenders? We've sold this bill of goods that learning isn't painful or hard, and yet actually learning really is painful. Well, not painful, but it's difficult. It's not easy. If it's easy, I'm not sure you've actually learned anything. We constantly have to find somewhere between those two. And so that's my struggle all the time, is I want to give you enough to feel confident, to feel like you can do this. But on the other side, you need to feel discomfort. You need to feel discomfort when you're learning. You need to feel like, I'm not so sure, I need to take a risk. Risks are not necessarily always comfortable. So I think for me, that's that, and there's that system piece behind it, because if they feel too uncomfortable, they're going to the administration to say, and so how do you, I think that's our conversation, is where's the balance between those things?
I'm curious about the conversation in the domains track around this, because one of the key principles with students is the way it changes the nature of student work into a public forum. And I'm curious a little bit about the conversation that's happening around that.
Yeah, it's so, because even the title of an essay is it a domain of my own if you give me a grade, right? So how far does student agency extend? And I think the biggest understanding is that there's no silver bullet. It's one of many tools. We ended up in the conversation where we were about the LMS, which, evil LMS, and then the freedom of the domain of my own. And it's just that balance between what assignments work in different spaces. We've been talking about the metaphor of a rehearsal space versus a performance space. And so you think about a domain of one's own as the performance space, and maybe what happens in LMS as a kind of rehearsal space. And I just think the other problem, just to go back for a second to rubrics, is that, I don't use them. I've been teaching for 15 years, college students for 15 years, and they end up feeling like a false contract. And I think the challenge is to create a space where, for students who feel like uncertainty is a way for them to challenge themselves. feels very idealistic when you're working with students who have jobs and who are anxious about grades and anxious about performance and the credential, right, of getting a degree. And I can imagine, I haven't used a domain of one's own, but I can imagine thinking about that work as something that happens outside of the classroom could actually balance the tension that the rubric causes. Because at the end of the day, then it's the student's work.
I think we still got 5 minutes left. Shut the lights off. It's all right.
You're sitting too still.
That's right.
Oh, I see the action there. No, these are hard balances, I think. There was a wonderful conversation on Twitter. I can't remember which day it was. I saw Jesse and Sean back there with Jess Reingold as well. And Jess jumped in and said, well, wait a minute. Us as her point of view as a student, recently being a student, that we want that structure. And when you take that structure away and make it too flexible, it freaks us out.
Yeah, and we talked all about tensions this morning and about how critical approaches to instructional design is all about just like actively marinating in tension between the necessary structure from which unexpected things can then emerge, the tension between pedagogy and between providing the dedicated support that is often expected and leaving room for some uncertainty.
And I think that's the life, as Amy was just saying, that's the life of somebody who kind of believes that they is to play through those tensions and do so with a lot of empathy and a lot of kind of care for the humans that are the students and care for yourself in the same way, to kind of give yourself the space to not have the answers all the time. I think we sometimes don't forgive ourselves for that in the right way. So I think that's part of the life of somebody who wants to be a critical pedagogue.
I love those two words, empathy and care, right there, Amy. Is part of that conversation we had on Twitter the other night, was that we need to build up the trust with the students, because we'll come in with this, we're going to do things differently and it's going to be flexible, and you're just this new teacher to them, and I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know if I can trust that it's going to work that way when it comes down to the grade at the end of the semester. And I think that's really, really important, and I love that you brought those two words out.
I'm seeing this comment. This is my first time, so I don't know. I just know there's someone as a dinosaur.
Jump in. There's no rules.
I'm very excited about the dinosaur. But I'm seeing it said here, having recently finished on my doctoral work, I have to say I needed the rubrics, especially online, to really understand what the professor was looking for. And that goes back to the questions we were talking about, where students really want to know what you want so that they can deliver it. And the idea is if they know it, then they can produce it. And that's understandable, but also I think I always think in my fantasy mind, I want you to learn what you want to learn. I want to know the questions you have, and tell us what you want, and tell us what you have formatted so that we can turn it in and get that grade.
I want to do something I wouldn't expect.
Right,
But at the same time, I mean, that's not that, and I love that. I would love for every class to be able to be like that. But they encounter a different environment in other classes, and so I think that the notion of trust is a really important one, because they need to be able to trust that if they bring something that you don't expect, that will be validated in a way that's consistent with the narrative.
Got a few minutes here.
I would say, in addition,
go for it, Samantha, please.
In addition to I think the other piece of that, though, is also what the students expect coming into the classroom. And I can't go, enough on the way we have trained students through our systems about what they expect and what they think learning looks like. And so, when you throw out, and especially to students who maybe aren't, who are at lower levels where I teach, when you throw it out to them and say, I really want you to be excited about learning, they look at you blankly, and they can trust you and they can empathize with you. But there's a certain point at which that class gets very difficult to continue, because either you're pushing all of it on them, or they're just sitting there and they're like, hey, can we just go early? And it's like, and it's different. I mean, you always have a few students who are up, who are there with you and are ready to go. And I've tried, I use a design thinking approach in my writing classes, where they pursue projects of their own passion and write about it. And so the whole sequence of everything they're doing is supposed to be something that they care about. They, they run it. And it's often, it's again, a mixed reception with it. And there's, and we have group, I don't know, there's lots of stuff that I do. And it is, I don't think it's them. I think it's because of what they come in expecting, and changing that expectation. All I can hope is that at the end of the class that their expectations about learning have changed, and that they'll start advocating for the kind of learning that they really should be getting, that they will benefit from. But I don't know whether that happens all the time or not.
The dinosaur is scary. Tanya keeps jumping in and out, so let me voice her text here so the viewers can see it, that she thinks about little kids though, and they don't have that problem. And I see that so often where people are thinking, but the students aren't mature enough to learn this way. But no, little kids learn this way. I think it's part of the system, like a lot of us have said. They've been through this system where learning is this way, and if we change it up, it freaks them out. And you're up on time, so I want to make sure we're respectful of your time there on site.
We have folks coming in for a workshop, so we should probably keep the premises.
Any closing points there from your side, Amy? Last nugget.
I will say that one other thing that's emerged is around appreciation, and so maybe take with you the idea of building appreciation practices, like active gratitude. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll see some changes.
Wonderful. Good word to end with, appreciation. Thank you, Amy. Amy, Patricia, Sonia.
Thank you.
And the rest of us will stay online, and we'll let you get back to the workshops there.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for your time.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Daniel.
Ciao.
You rock, buddy. Okay, we can continue the conversation. There's so much I could discuss there. Oh my God. I love these topics.
Me too.
Yeah, the dinosaur's cool. It is.
You like my dinosaur? He's eating a minion.
We're still recording, by the way. This is the way this works. Terry's got the magic button to decide when to stop recording. I can see the little live thing up here in the right corner.
So still no swears.
Still no swears, exactly. Thoughts, Terry? I kind of took over a little bit there, but I knew it's because your audio was hard. And I wanted to get, I got your point in, Tanya, while you were disconnected and reconnecting.
I hear myself twice whenever I talk, so it's
freaks you out.
And I don't want to listen to myself.
And Tanya, you're muted again.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, sorry, I was jumping in and out there quite a bit, but
Sure.
It was an interesting conversation.
So why don't you extend a little bit more your thoughts on but kids? This is easy for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think about that a lot when I watch my own kids and their friends. And, you know, if I say, go build something or whatever, right? Whatever it is, like write a story, you know, they don't come back and say, well, how many words? And, you know, do I have to use big words or small words? And how many big words?
Is this worth?
And what happens if we read paragraphs, right? You know, right. They just write a story. And if they have problems, it's, I don't know what to write about. And if you can get over that problem, it all flows. And so I wonder about what happens from there till we get, you know, kids in university, and even my doctoral program. You know, I'm saying let's build a website, let's do something. And they're like, Rubrics says presentation, Rubrics says one handout, and so what
must
happens?
Be PowerPoint, Arial,
yeah, exactly.
11 point.
So what happens from those little kids to that we've lost that ability to take risks?
Yeah, and that's my pushback when I got colleagues that say they're not ready for this, they're not mature enough, and I'm like, no, it's they're like they've been killed over 15 years of education, and that's where we got them now. And I love your point about your kids, Tanya, because my perspective on education since I started 22 years ago changed a lot when I had kids, and especially when I went to the schoolyards and notice the interaction and the effects of their parents on their learning. And our kids have to suffer with that. They're, you know, kids of educators, and we're different than most parents. So I have a lot more empathy for my students that show up in university, that they're products of all the education that happened to them before. And Samantha brought up that point as well.
And in community college, like where I teach, many of the professors are products of that. They haven't been marinated in pedagogy. So they're going to teach the way they were taught.
Yeah, it's hard.
So it's hard to be like, oh, don't assess at all, or like even start that conversation. No grading. Like it's hard to start that conversation with them when they're just still trying to get their head around it.
So I think some of that is the term grading, and so I think it's if you shift the term grade to feedback. Grades really are a measure of feedback. They've become a shortcut for feedback. You have met the expectations or you have not met the expectations, and here is where you have and here is where you haven't. And I think that it's all of a shortcut because, really it's about giving students substantial feedback as an experienced audience. And I think that's sometimes when we think about it, what's the teacher's role besides sort of structuring and facilitating an experience? It's also being a guide that has a little bit more experience with it, that can interact with the student to give them feedback and nudge them in various ways. And that's a lot of time and a lot of effort. And sometimes when you have in a community college, Terry, like I am in, and you are in 5 classes and 25 or 30 or 35 students per class and 3 preps. Those conversations, while you may in your heart want to have them, it gets very, there's a point at which it's like, oh, and then the students don't want to have it. They're just like, give me my grade. I just want to know, did I pass? Did I not pass? I did, I for a couple of years, I used this whole grading system that was all points based, and you couldn't figure out whether it was A, a B, or C, or D. It was you either got enough points or you didn't get enough points. And it drove students crazy. And I got so much feedback from them that I finally gave it up, because they're like, I don't know how much work to put in on this. I'm like, put in as much work as you want to make it as good as you want it to be. Well, I don't know what that is, and I can't tell what you so it just, I don't know, it's frustrating sometimes.
It's hard.
One of the patches of the patch book we created here was an assignment on getting feedback on your feedback. It's called the feedback loop. I'll put the link into the chat, because it's interesting how it's just kind of, it's never ending.
Yep.
I can get feedback from you on the feedback I gave you, and teaching the students how to get it and give it. I'll find the link and I'll put it.
Terry, I've actually read the patch book, so yeah, it's great. It's awesome.
Thanks.
I love the meta of that. I'm just thinking, it popped in my head because that's the way my head works, about just dropped in to see what condition my condition is in.
And I think sometimes there's a whole piece. We joke that faculty are just like our students, right? We do the same things they do. We don't read before we come to a meeting. We don't read before, we do all the same things that we don't like that from our students. But I think that sometimes one of the things that we also do is we ask our students to self-reflect. We ask our students to think about how they did and what they did and what they could do better. At least many of us do. But we don't necessarily have the space or time, or make the space or time, because of all the things that are put on top of us, or the expectations. And there's the whole system that you have to conform within that doesn't necessarily support the time and the energy and the space and the authenticity of self-reflection and taking risks for you as a faculty member. And if you're a part-time faculty member, forget about it. And since so many of our courses are taught by part-time faculty, I think many of them actually go way, way far beyond what many of us as full-time faculty do. I've seen it. I have an office outside of my office where the part-time faculty meet with students, and I hear the self-reflections and the conversations, and I think they do a fabulous job, and we don't recognize it. But that's a whole piece of our job that isn't written down anywhere, and so it's not acknowledged. It's like, well, that's not part of teaching, and actually that's the most important part of teaching.
You only teach 15 hours a week. It's such an easy job, Samantha.
Right, I know. I don't even do that right now, so.
But that's critical.
And I wonder too how.
Sorry.
I just wonder how much, I think, because I've been thinking a lot about scale and about big scale, but especially about small and things that are small, and that things that are small don't scale. But I wonder how much to how we've gotten in a system where it's the job of the feedback, and why that's the system that we've set up, where we're not looking, instead of either from people in the class or people outside. I think in some ways we've limited ourselves in the way we just think of where that feedback's coming from. I think that's just another piece of the model, that if real feedback doesn't scale, then we got to think about how do you get those relationships built to get good, honest conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you remove the parts that just aren't that useful, right? And it's when I talk to educators about spending a lot more time on good feedback, they say, but I don't have time because of this, and this, and this. And we need to think about what to remove. And I kind of hinted on that, and you talked deeply about that, Samantha, about do we just, oh, well, we'll do our own thing and then kind of apply it to the real system. But then we're doing double work in many ways. And that just, it gets to be too much. And a lot of teachers will say, it's too much, I can't do that.
Or you become isolated, and you're in your office and you're impacting the students that you have, but you're not part of the greater system. You kind of give up on trying to change the greater system. So that's also, I think it's our responsibility as part of the community to participate in that system and to try to change that system for the better. But there's so many pressures on so many levels on the system itself, and that are external, that are people, weighing in on education that don't really know what they're talking about, or have been poorly served by their own education, so they're responding to their own experience.
Right. They're railing against the bad experience they had, which isn't representative of what we're trying to deliver. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, I could talk about this for hours.
Let's end on a happier note about care and empathy and appreciation. Let's end somewhere there.
I wanted to say,
go for it, Terry,
to the Amy's before they left. I had a master's in instructional design.
Me too.
Which total engineering approach to building learning, and it really can sometimes just beat the life of the learner. And so I just really appreciate their work. Putting the humanity back into it.
Now, I'll say my instructional design program was very different from that, so I didn't feel like it beat the life out of learning, but it was also combined with some other things, and it was combined with a K through 12 certification process. So and I was in the classroom the whole time, and I've spent most of my time in the classroom and done very little ID work. There were pieces of it that I took and I kept. But I think that it can, when I think that when I look at an LMS and I'm like, the people who designed this have never actually sat down and taught a class or thought about connection or whatever. So.
Yeah, I didn't want to generalize the program I took as doing that. Yeah. I mean, just the process itself, just taken as it is, can really be lifeless.
It can.
Or interpreted wrong. I'll leave some positive that our institution is moving away from even courses and moving to a competency-based system. And right now we have an experiment with, we take 6 courses that the students are supposed to take, and they're doing a project. It's called a challenge, or reto in Spanish. So they're in this one room for 6 hours a day where they kind of live. They don't have classes. And we're going in and talking to them this week about how this is going to work and how each of us faculty assigned to a course, I'm putting air quotes on that, I'm contributing to the computing security model. Someone's contributing to the citizenship. We have a professor from that area. And we're all working together to have them develop this software for some kids that are marginalized but need some help in math programs. But immediately the students are like, but how are we going to be graded? And are you taking attendance? And they're reacting with the classic things that they worry about. And even some of our faculties are like, well, when do I apply my exams? Right. And so it's really hard. And we have this great institutional push, which I'll support that there is good pushes from above, but it's hard for us to break that mold and embrace it. And I love that we're doing this. It's wonderful. But we all need to find our little spaces where we can embrace better learning. And that's my point.
Yeah.
And I want to see the dinosaur again.
The dinosaur, that one?
What's his name?
It gets named by every child who comes into the office. So he's been Henry, and he's been Frank, and he's been Bob, and he's been Sue, or she's been Sue, or she's been a dinosaur named Sue. Which the kid who named that, I had to pull up the video, or there's a song, A Dinosaur Named Sue. I'm like, oh, you named it Sue, and here it is. It's a puppet. It's a big hand puppet. So for when my students come who have kids, I take it down. It gives them something to play with, and it, sort of makes it a little more friendly. And on video calls, it's a little threatening up behind me. So
that's what Patricia was saying. That was awesome. Okay, I got to run because I got a student who just came in. Students are important. But thanks for the conversation.
Yep.
And we'll be seeing some of you later. We have another session going in about 4 hours.
Bye. Sorry I won't be here this afternoon.
Cheers.
I'm going to stop the broadcast.
Thanks, Terry.